everyone. I'm so excited that we get to have with us Angélica Negrón. She's here today to answer some of our questions. So, Angélica, can you tell me, what is your first musical memory?
My first musical memory is when I was very young. I received this little music box. I don't know if you're familiar with Strawberry Shortcake, the cartoon. So it was a Strawberry Shortcake music box that I still have to this day. It comes from a little bit, well, actually not a little bit, a really dark story in my family. But it holds a very dear place in my heart. When I was 3, I lost 4 cousins on the same day, and my aunt. And even though I don't remember, this was a car accident, and I don't remember much because I was really really young. I was just 3, but I do remember my grandma giving away all the toys that belonged to my cousins, and I got a Care Bears plush toy, and I got this Strawberry Shortcake music box. That is, yeah, it's an object that has really influenced a lot of my life.
I'm curious, do you still listen to it sometimes?
I do. I keep it in Puerto Rico actually, which is where I was born and raised. And I've thought of bringing it here, but for some reason it feels like it belongs there. So every time I go back, I reconnect with it.
Well, that leads us to the next question. How did your music change from being in Puerto Rico and then in the United States?
That's interesting. I think it's changed mostly because I've changed. So it's hard to tell if it has to do with my move to the U.S. But when I moved, I was in my mid 20s. I was 25, so it is very much like a formative time too. But I do remember starting to question more academia. I moved here to do a master's, while I was doing the master's here, I was kind of just realizing that a lot of these spaces were not necessarily the most welcoming to someone like that looked like me, and that combined with this whole thing of the canon and the historical baggage that comes with it, and trying to find my place within that. And so I feel like it's hard to tell again if this had to do with me moving here or me just getting older, but I just stopped caring about what others thought of my music and about finding my place, whatever that meant at that time for me. I was just like, I'm just gonna do my thing, and then let whatever happen happen. But there's definitely thinking specifically about things that have changed musically for me that have a direct connection to now being part of the diaspora. I can think of the more years I'm away from Puerto Rico, even though I'm very lucky and privileged that my home is just a 3 hour and a half flight in normal times to go. So I can go back and forth a few times during the year, but still I feel like there's this sense of missing the sounds, the colors, textures, smells, taste, everything that I connect to home. So I've been finding myself incorporating more of those things in my music. Um, so sometimes it comes in very literal ways, like could be environmental sounds from like endemic bird species from the island, incorporating those in my music. Very rarely, but sometimes also in musical elements or rhythmic ideas. And like I always think that the dembow, which is the rhythm that we associate a lot with reggaeton, infiltrates always in my music in some way or another, even though sometimes it's very hidden. But I'm from a place called Carolina, the town where reggaeton was born, so that's it's just in my blood. So yeah, it's interesting how the more time I spend away from home, the more I kind of see things from a different perspective, and things that were maybe when I was living in the island were very abrasive, and I was writing music in some ways to escape that because they were always present, and I was not, in a way, I was not consenting to hearing them because they were just there, and I just had to listen to them. That now that I have a choice, I oftentimes choose to to go back and listen to them with fresh ears.
That's so beautifully put. You know, the things that we don't have a choice to listen to, and then actually the things that we choose to listen to, or how we listen. It's something I think about a lot, and leads me to the next question, which I'm fascinated by your plant instruments, and how you listen to them. It really ties in. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I write a lot of music for electronics and acoustic instruments. And once I realized that I wanted to write a lot for electronics, I knew that I had to also, in a way, tackle, or at least for myself, find a way that to make the performance of electronic music more engaging and inviting, and not just something that was very abstract in a computer and that you couldn't see the action behind the sound. So a lot of my interest in using non-conventional instruments stems from that, finding new ways of adding layers that are visual to the sounds, and for people to see the action behind the sound as well, in the same way that you would see when someone is blowing on a wind instrument. Um, so in my quest for that, I've been exploring for the past few years vegetables, and more recently, I would say for the past 4 years, plants. And I used two different technologies to work with that. One is called Ototo, and it's a little synthesizer that anything that's conductive can trigger a sound. So very simple kind of science that I put an alligator clip from the synthesizer to an object that's conductive. Could be metal, could be water. Vegetables and plants, because they have water in them, are great conductors of electricity. And then when I'm touching that object or that plant or a cauliflower, then what is happening, it is triggering a sound because I'm completing the circuit with my body. So that's one of the technologies I use. And the other one that I've been using too, it's one called MIDI Sprout. I think now they re-released a new version called Plant Wave. And that one is a little different in that it's reading the actual, it's like measuring the actual changes in energy in the plant. And then it's translating those into data that then I can assign parameters. So that in that way, that is most that is just closest to this sense of like the plant is making music. And so I'm interested in playing with those kind of two options, and one in which I have more compositional control, and one in which nature is more in charge, and seeing what comes out of that.
That's so cool. I remember seeing your performance, and I was fascinated because indeed you give the audience something to engage with that's different and beautiful and thought-provoking. I'm wondering, what is your composing routine like?
Well, I like to say that I try to compose every day, but that is not always true. So I try my best to do that, but what I found it's the most, at least, helpful for me and thing that keeps me sane, and that I'm not feeling guilty that if I'm not composing during a day, is that I'm always, and this is true, I'm always trying to immerse myself in the world of the piece that I'm working in. And that could be by listening to inspiring music. It could be listening to a podcast, watching a documentary, reading an article, any type of research, but just kind of, if I'm not composing, then I'm doing things that are activating other parts of my brain, or making me question things in the piece, or making me reconsider other options and possibilities. And I like to, in my office, to surround myself with, you can't see them now, but they're all in front of me, with just images, colors, textures, words that connect somehow to the project I'm working on, and so that it's always kind of around me.
That's awesome. No, and I mean, how could anyone compose every single day? That seems like,
yeah,
you'd never have time to breathe.
It's so, I mean, the one thing that and this has been a little challenging for me to kind of to embrace, because I just recently, like I would say for the past 2 years, I've made the transition to full-time composing, which I'm really grateful for. But at the same time, I felt like I just have to, it's like I have to show up to work every day, and I put this sometimes really heavy pressure on myself to compose every day, and I'm realizing that it's so important to have those breaks, and to realize that I don't have to create every day. At first I was like, I don't have to create something that I'm going to use every day as long as I'm composing and working on my craft, which I felt was true. But now I feel like I don't have to compose every day. I just have to be present in my craft and whatever that means for me that day.
Well, and it's interesting to me because aside from composing, you also perform, and not every composer does that. How do you prepare for performance?
Um, well, I try my best um, to not be crazy running around like the day off, but it always happens. I feel like I'm always obsessively changing things and listening again, and so it's just, I think it's a part of just my nature. But I do like um, to in terms of more practical things that I do, besides drinking lots of ginger tea, I also really like to in my head, without the instruments, kind of um, prepare or practice the choreography. I Because of the instruments I use that are very specific, especially with plants. Actually, that's because when I use vegetables, I lay them out in a way that is like a keyboard, so it's very easy for me to like visualize that my biggest vegetable is my lowest note, and then my small radishes are my sharps and flats. So that's very, I'm used now to seeing that as a keyboard. But with a plant, it's more of like, it's more sculptural.
Uh-huh.
So I have to really remember the mapping of the leaves to the pitches or to the sounds. So what I do is, like, in my head, I just kind of practice the choreography of the movements and the logistics of things that need to to happen in the setup. And yeah, but I think there's there's always something about just, for me, hoping that I can at one day achieve a moment in which I'm completely relaxed. I'm always working towards that. It never happens, but I'm always working towards having a super chill day of the performance in which I'm not stressing, and I'm not forgetting a cable or something. So, to-do lists also, and notes are really important because my setup is so so many little things and details that, yeah, that has helped me a lot too.
I've seen your setup, and yeah, I can't even begin to imagine just the transport of everything and worrying if you forgot something. I mean, it's really a testament to your memory and your organizational skills that you bring all of this together. I'm wondering, you spoke a little bit earlier about how being Latinx influenced your artistry, your upbringing and so forth, and the sounds that you grew up with. I just wonder if you could speak a little bit more to that and maybe where you are with it today.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I feel like it's hard also for me to separate myself from, like, what are the things about being Latinx that have influenced me, because it's such an important part of who I am, that I think it impacts everything I do. Every show is the same way that being a woman does. So I can think of more recently just being very aware that the more, this is this is really weird to say out loud, but the more successful I become as a composer, the more I'm navigating white spaces. So I've been really aware of that, and the fact that I'm mostly writing for white ensembles. I hope that changes with all the reckoning that's happening. But I'm really aware of not only where I stand, what I have to say, but also that, sadly, sometimes in commissions I'm filling a quota or checking boxes. So I'm trying to be very careful of the people that I work with, and mindful, and also just just making sure that they want to work with me for my music and not for what I could represent on a on a grant application. And yeah, I mean, that's, for me, that in terms of my of how that's my art has been impacted. I think that there's more so an awareness right now of those systemic structures that I'm complicit in, because the more successful I am, the more I'm moving in those circles, but at the same time that I am still for them the other. So there's that kind of I would say a hyper awareness that has um, very direct connections to things that I write. For example, I recently finished a piece that is called "Say Something in Spanish," um, and it has to do a lot with like this idea of how oftentimes BIPOC composers are, when they're commissioned, they're asked to either say something or write something inspired by their trauma, or something about your identity and your culture, and and this kind of gaze from another that I think I was not as aware of. That's a something that, as a Puerto Rican composer, because we are more connected to the US than Latin America, or at least that was my experience when I lived there. There there is this kind of false sense of belonging that I had when I was living in the island, and then when I moved here, it was very clear that I was not one of them. So it's so I feel like in my music in general, I'm always trying to answer questions that I can't fully answer with words, or even in conversations with other people. So my music, a lot of the times, it's digging into those questions, and more recently, it's been preoccupied with those kind of subjects that relate to the complexities of identity.
I'm so glad that you said your truth in this so eloquently. Honestly, it's inspiring for me to hear, because I've shared a lot of word for word your concerns and your sentiments. And I think this is the first time actually that I've sat down and spoken to another Latinx in our industry, and how it feels about filling a quota, let's say, or feeling like the other. I know for me that music was always the space where the passports didn't matter, the identity, name tags, you know, could be stripped away. And so I'm wondering, how do you feel your music is able to enact a sort of artist advocacy? I mean, you've spoken to that about, you know, how you're able to put your own views into that in a way that are true to yourself. But I wonder, on a broad scale, do you feel that music can play a role to advocate?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, connected to what I was talking about, in terms of my experience, I think really being true to who I am as an artist and human, and hopefully encouraging others to do the same and not feel the pressures that they have to perform whatever version of Latinidad you think others might want from you. That there's not such a thing. There's like multiplicities in all of us, and that being an artist is a big part of it. It's expressing those through your art form. Um, I think by like just occupying space unapologetically, and inviting everyone to be a part of it, demystifying what the word composer means, demystifying what electronic music is as something like high tech or highbrow. Those things are really meaningless to me, and I work really hard in creating work and experiences that in which people feel invited and welcome, and also curious about exploring sounds and empowered to do them without having any professional studies. Um, and I think, I mean, for me, in terms of advocacy too, I think just artists in general and have this curiosity and this drive of asking questions and imagining new possibilities, which I know is very broad and abstract, but it is something that, you know, I think if it's if you think of it in a way that's very intentional and thoughtful, that could and not passive, that could definitely connect to action and and creating hopefully change.
just beautifully said. I really share your sentiment. And, you know, along those lines, I wonder, are there any artists that have provided you a space as role models, and in particular, maybe any Latinx musical influences, and it could be, you know, musicians or non-musicians. I want to keep the question broad.
Yeah.
Individuals that you think have inspired you and your music.
So many, so many. From like big pop icons, you know, like Selena, Ricky Martin, even J-Lo, to like ambient artists like Federico Durand. There's a Puerto Rican band that no longer exists, but it's one of the main reasons I write music. They were called Super Aquello. And the amazing Colombian singer Lido Pimienta, dear friend Helado Negro, Dominican queen Rita Indiana, Juana Molina de Argentina, and composers like Tania León, Alfonso Fuentes, who was my mentor in Puerto Rico. There's just so much so much good stuff, and in terms of, besides like going beyond music to visual artists like Justin Favela, who I recently did a collaboration with. He does a lot of beautiful piñata paintings and has really interesting ways of exploring Latinidad in his work. And also this conversation that we were having of like being really aware of what others, of the stereotypes and what others might expect from you, and playing with that to his favor in a way that's really thoughtful and compelling. Comedians, Lorelai Ramirez, Julio Torres, illustrator from Puerto Rico, Mariela Pavon. Just there's, yeah, so many amazing
I want to
artists.
learn from you. I mean, I'm like fascinated by all the names that you've listed. And I think this idea of a conversation around Latinidad and the expectations, I really hope that we can explore that sometime and in a broad sense, because it's really something I think you're navigating very beautifully and delicately, because it is so tricky from one person to the next. And so often we're kind of put in this box, but it's different, you know, someone who's from a Mexican background to someone from a Puerto Rican background. I was not born in Mexico, but I have a Mexican passport and I've lived there. And, you know, whether you were born in a place and came to the United States later, all of these things are so varied under this umbrella of Latinx. And so I feel you've advanced and matured in that in ways that I hope and aspire to. And I've learned a lot from this conversation.
Thank you so much.
No, really. I know you've included a video that you are sharing with us. Can you tell us a little bit about the video?
Sure. So that's a performance I recorded for the Gray Sound Sessions, and I play the vegetables using the Ototo interface that I talked about before. And it's a collection of ambient pop songs that I wrote for myself to play and sing. It's called Pasajero, and it has to do with this longing and search for home, and how the concept of home shifts over time. And it's dedicated to all of those people that have had to leave their place of origin to pursue anything else.
I really find this piece so powerful. And I just want to say again, how much of a fan of yours I am, also in the sense that you're so articulate. You obviously have a strong intellect, but I love the way that you embrace the word pop music and popular culture, which I think too often in our field are looked down upon. And I'm interested in reframing that narrative as well. So
no, really definitely. That was, I mean, just, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I feel that my music had a really clear shift before I was caring too much about specifically those imaginary lines that divide genres and styles. And when I just stopped caring and I embraced all that I loved as part of who I am unapologetically. So that for me meant just my love for pop music, you know, and that it's not all these things that I have, that I love Shostakovich and I love Selena and I love Chilean pop, electronic pop, and like all that, those things are not separate. They're all just a part of who I am, and that I can find ways to convey those through my music that feel genuine and honest to who I am.
Well, I love that, and I love hearing that in your music, and I'm inspired by that too, because I'm the same. I found there was such a difference between what I listened to before going on stage to what I'd sing on stage. I thought this is almost like two people, and
Mm-hmm.
it's also another conversation. I hope we keep going. But before we close out this conversation, I'm curious, what would be a question you would like to be asked? And then I would like to ask you that question.
Huh. I didn't think of this. That's a really good question. What question would I like to be asked? We talked about so many things, and it's really it's really telling of the kind of person you are, that in such a short amount of time we covered so many really deep things. Maybe something about something that has to do, oh god, maybe something that has to do with my family. How my upbringing, I mean, obviously it was in Puerto Rico, so there's that aspect of it, but just my family as people, how they have influenced my work.
How has your family influenced your work?
Well, I would say that in the beginning, and this comes back to this question of consent and in listening and in formative listening experiences. My dad used to listen to, he's like a big salsa fan, like old school salsa. We call it salsa gorda. And he used to listen to that at a volume that was like just inhumane. He still does. So I think I was very resistant to salsa music in the beginning because of that, and now again, it's one of those that now it's like I love it, and it reminds me of him, of course. In terms of my mom, she still is like a great pandero player and is the percussionist of the family. She's not a professional musician, but she is like way better at playing any percussion instrument that certainly that I am, and a lot of people I know. So and she also exposed me to a lot of things at a young age that I still hold dear to my heart to this day. And I was very fortunate to grow up around a very diverse community, surrounded uh, by not only really resilient and powerful women, but also drag queen shows that have to this day still I think of, um, and I feel very lucky that that I was not only able to grow up in a place that's very musical and so rich in its culture and its traditions, but also with a family that that was not only supportive and encouraging, but also um, normalized a lot of things that that now looking back at it for me were things that I carry to this day.
I am so thankful. I really feel like you've shared something very deep and authentic with me, and I know with those who will watch. And I find it really inspiring to speak with you. I'm really very, very thankful and feel lucky right now. And I don't want this to end, but I also want you to go back to the amazing work you're doing. So with that, muchas gracias.
Gracias
And,
a ti, Carla.
gracias. And we'll put in the links here where to find more of your music and check you out and hopefully follow you on social media and stuff. So,
Thank you so
gracias.
much. Adiós. Gracias.
Hasta luego.